Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today in Vlachim in the Czech Republic visiting Cellier and Balat, or S&B, huge ammunition manufacturer that has a pretty extensive reference armory of interesting small arms. And so today, I have pulled out all three versions of the Israeli Uzi to take a look at, because I think it's going to be a really neat opportunity to look at the three different iterations. They all very clearly keep the sort of Uzi characteristic trademark look. They just get progressively smaller as we go. So the original Uzi, of course, was developed in the early 1950s, adopted, used in Israel, and then adopted around the world. This was, interesting fact, this was the German MP2. You're probably familiar with the MP5. Well, before they had the MP5, they had previous submachine guns, and this was adopted as the MP2. Anyway, right from the beginning, as soon as the regular Uzi was in production, Uziel Gal, its inventor, started working on possibilities for a compact model. The thing was, he wasn't willing to accept a higher rate of fire. The Uzi has a very nice sedate, like roughly 600 round rate of fire that makes it fairly controllable. That's been part of the reason it's been so successful, and Gal just wasn't willing to sacrifice that rate of fire. He figured if the rate of fire went up a lot, the gun wasn't going to be really practical to use, and so it wasn't worth building. And he wasn't able to get a compact version that didn't have a much higher rate of fire. So that project basically died until the late 1970s, at which time, of course, the Ingram M11, M10 series are coming on the market. And in fact, Shin Bet, one of the Israeli Special Forces intelligence units, actually purchased a number of Ingram M11s. And in fact, they used them in the famous and incredibly daring raid on Entebbe Airport. There were a couple of suppressed 380 M11s in that operation, along with a bunch of other guns. And it seems, this isn't written down, but it seems pretty clear to me that IMI at that point basically said, what the heck? Why, we've got submachine guns, why don't we have a cool compact little submachine gun that we can use instead of buying stuff from Gordon Ingram? So in 1978, the project is essentially revived, although it's no longer being run by Uziel Gal. It's other engineers at IMI who start working on a compact version of the Uzi. And that becomes this. It is called the Mini Uzi, very creatively. The first batch are manufactured in 1978. It's 100 guns. They're given to Israeli Special Forces to test. By 1980, this gun is available on the commercial export market. They start selling them. It has been shortened. It has been lightened. We'll go over the details in a minute. But essentially, they've cut a couple inches off the gun. They've cut a couple inches off the bolt. And the rate of fire is in fact substantially higher, but that's just something that they accept. Now, originally this is developed as an open bolt gun. This example is closed bolt, and we'll get to that in a moment, because at the same time that the Mini Uzi is being developed in Israel, Uziel Gal is in the United States working for a company called Action Arms that wants to import the Uzi into the US. Of course, it can't do that as a machine gun. It has to do it as a semi-auto, and in order for it to be feasible as a semi-auto, it needs to fire from a closed bolt. So Action Arms brings in Gal, and he develops a semi-auto version of the Uzi, essentially cutting the back end of the bolt off and turning it into a separate striker system. So they can keep the same, essentially the striker fires from an open bolt, where most of the bolt just chambers a cartridge and closes. Again, I'll pull that apart in a moment and you can see it. Gal develops this system, and then Action Arms buys semi-automatic Uzis from IMI in Israel. They start out with Uzi carbines, which are, it's essentially this gun with a giant 16-inch barrel, which looks pretty stupid. I'm sorry, this gun, huge 16-inch barrel, on the mini frame. And then they also introduced the Uzi pistol in semi-auto. Now today, we're used to semi-auto pistols being this like cool loophole you can use to import rifles by not having buttstocks. But back in the 1980s, they figured if we're going to sell it as a pistol, it needs to be practical as a pistol. So they made it even shorter, something that could be fired with one hand reasonably effectively. Now that comes onto the market in like 1985, and right about that time, oh, and by the way, it's a shorter receiver, but it's essentially using the same bolt as the Mini Uzi. That's what they've got. Now, about that same time, IMI realizes that they can take that micro Uzi, well, the Uzi pistol, and they can make it full auto, and they call it the micro Uzi. And the idea here is this is even smaller. It is a concealable, more compact, sort of a VIP protection sort of thing by having the closed bolt system. So they take the semi-auto closed bolt gun and they convert it to full auto closed bolt, which gives them the ability to, at least on paper, compete with something like an MP5 that is a closed bolt submachine gun. That gives you much better first round hit probability. You take this thing has an insanely high rate of fire. Allegedly, it's as high as 1,800 rounds a minute. We'll hopefully find out in a few minutes, but I'm getting ahead of myself. You leave it on semi-auto, you've got a closed bolt pistol with a shoulder stock. They stick the same style of stock, although it's a little bit shorter. It's a 2-inch shorter length of pull on there than on the Mini. But that gets released as the micro Uzi. And about the same time, they also take the full auto closed bolt and they retrofit it back into the Mini Uzi. So of our 3 patterns here, we actually have 4 different guns that are available. You've got the regular Uzi, it's open bolt, full auto. You've got the Mini Uzi, which can be had either in open bolt or closed bolt form. And then you've got the micro Uzi, which is only closed bolt. So those are our 3 iterations. Now let's take a closer look at the component parts that went into them. I really do think it's cool how we have 3 different scales of what is very recognizably the exact same gun. Like, in addition to the grip assemblies being basically the same, although not strictly speaking all interchangeable, the receiver design is the same. You've got these reinforcing pressings that are the same on all 3 versions. Like, it's a very recognizable family of guns, but they get substantially smaller, lighter, and faster as we go through. So just to give you some reference points, the standard Uzi has a 10.2-inch barrel, the Mini has a 7.8-inch, and the Micro comes in at a 4.6-inch barrel. And a similar sort of scale for weight, we have 7.7 pounds for the standard, 6 pounds for the Mini, and a mere 3.3 pounds for the Micro. Combine that, of course, with the rate of fire, 600, 900, 1200, and this should be pretty interesting. But before we go out to the range, let's pull these apart and take a look at the internals. These all disassemble the same way. There's a little spring catch up here that allows you to remove the top cover. Pull the bolt back, lift it up, and out of the gun. And then we have a pin back here. Pull that out, and the fire control assembly comes off. And unscrew the barrel nut, pull the barrel out, and there is our standard Uzi. Very simple. This is an open bolt firing gun, so you're going to cock it by pulling the bolt all the way back, then pulling the trigger will drop it forward, pick up a round, fire it immediately, and recock the action. Note that the Uzi does have a ratcheting charging handle system, so that if you pull the handle back insufficiently far to fully cock the bolt, it will not pick up a round and fire it inadvertently. Now I'm going to skip all the way down to the micro Uzi next, because in order to convert this to open or to closed bolt firing, they essentially cut off the back section of the bolt and fixed a firing pin to it. So instead of the entire bolt assembly locking back and then moving forward, with the Micro, when you charge it, it all comes back. This, just the rear plate, is held in place by the striker. The bolt closes. It's going to actually chamber a cartridge. There we go. And when you pull the trigger, it's just this rear plate that gets released. And we can actually see that if we look at the fire control group. On the original Uzi here, you have 2 sear surfaces that are holding the bolt back that drop when you pull the trigger. On the Micro, you only have 1 on this side because it's only hooking right there on this rear plate. And so there is the Micro fully disassembled. Note that it does not have a ratcheting mechanism in the charging handle because it doesn't need one since it's a closed bolt gun. So with the Mini Uzi, you will find them manufactured as either open bolt or closed bolt firing designs. This particular one is a closed bolt one. All right, let's take a look at a couple of these component parts. Here we have barrels, standard, mini, micro. Pretty self-evident there. The mini and micro both came with compensator slots cut into the end of the barrel. The standard Uzi didn't have that, really didn't need it. A full-size gun, nearly 8 pounds, 10-inch barrel. Yeah, it doesn't need the slots. Next, let's take a look at the receivers. So again, standard, mini, micro. I've aligned these based on where the barrel face actually is, so where the cartridge chambers. And so you can see that the front end stays pretty much the same on all of these. They shorten the rear end of the gun, and in each instance they move the grip assembly, as you can see from the magazine hole, they move the grip assembly forward a bit. So the guns remain balanced right in the center of the receiver, but the shortening all comes from the back end. The grip assemblies are essentially identical for all three, standard, mini, micro. Note that the micro has this sort of sheet metal casing to it that's a bit longer than the other two patterns. But if we look at them from the top, you can see that the actual fire control parts stay exactly the same. They've just added a bit more material front and back to the micro here. The only differentiation between our standard and mini is that the standard, being full auto, has these 2 selector sear tabs, and the mini, as a semi-auto, has only 1 right there, not there. Now here's where things start to get pretty interesting. The standard Uzi bolt is of course larger, longer, heavier than the other two, but the mini and the micro actually use the same length bolt. In fact, the only way to distinguish them is from the top, where the micro has this finger cut out and the mini does not. So this is going to make the micro bolt a little bit lighter, which is going to be one element in it having a higher rate of fire than the mini. But really, this is done for disassembly. If we go ahead and put these bolts in their respective guns, you can see that on the mini, I have lots of finger space up here to pull the bolt back and lift it out of the gun. On the micro, if it weren't for that cutout, the bolt goes basically all the way up to the front sight, and there would be no good way for me to try and compress the springs and bring the bolt back to get it out of the gun. So they cut this almost like the finger cut on an M3A1 grease gun, and that's just going to let you pull the bolt back. In terms of heightened rate of fire, what this means is that the difference between the 900 round per minute here and the 1200 round per minute here is going to be very slightly from this bolt being lighter, and mostly from the fact that this receiver is just barely an inch shorter than the mini receiver. That means that this bolt is going to come to a stop faster, and it's then going to reciprocate faster. That cuts the shot-to-shot time and gives you a higher rate of fire. Up here we have a little bit more time for the bolt to decelerate. It takes longer to cycle. And then of course, for comparison's sake, we have our original standard Uzi up here at the top with a much heavier bolt and a much longer travel time. So that's going to be a much more comfortable slow firing gun. But that's really just all theoretical. So let's get out on the range and see if it holds true, and see what the stupidly high rate of fire on the micro is actually like to control. I know I said I was going to be doing some shooting, but that is not something that I can show you on YouTube. So hopefully you enjoyed the video thus far. This marks the end of the YouTube cut of this video. We're going to head out to the range, however, and the full version of the video with that shooting, testing, and tryout is going to be posted over on the History of Weapons in War streaming app. That has not just all of the footage from Forgotten Weapons, but a whole bunch of other historical educational firearms channels as well. So if you would like to help support the firearms educational community and get yourself perhaps off of YouTube in the process, please do consider heading over to History of Weapons in War, that's weaponsandwar.tv, and subscribe to our video app over there. Hopefully you enjoyed this one as far as it went. Thanks for watching.